Welcome to Not Just Ads, the show where B2B brands discover how creator-led content drives pipeline, builds trust, and grows long-term brand equity. Each episode, we speak with business leaders, founders, and creators who are defining their categories. I'm your host, Marcus Sherwin, and this is the creator economy for B2B. Hello and welcome today to Not Just Ads, the creator economy for B2B. I'm delighted today to be joined by Kathleen Booth. Kathleen has a wide range of experience across a number of roles in B2B companies and marketing. She's very active and involved in Pavilion, and most recently she leads marketing, VP of marketing at .io, which she will share more. Kathleen, thanks very much for joining us today on the show. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, Marcus. Thanks for having me on.
You've a seasoned background in B2B marketing. I'd love for you to share a little bit with us of how did you get into the space, and was it like something that you knew that you wanted to get into from an early age, or was it something that you kind of just arrived at it by discovery, or how did it all come about?
I definitely did not know I wanted to go into it. I studied political science, and I was very passionate about changing the world, and particularly parts of the underdeveloped parts of the world. And so I spent the first 10 years of my career doing that and working on clean water projects. And what actually brought me back into marketing, funny enough, I did do one of my graduate degrees is in marketing, but I hadn't been using it. I did it more. I was doing it as part of an MBA program in conjunction with a Master's of International Politics. And what happened is I was working in Africa on clean water projects and seeing that the projects were not progressing because there was a communication breakdown and people didn't understand why they were doing them. And in the meantime, people were not getting clean water. They were the ones that were ultimately suffering. And I had this aha moment that my marketing degree could actually really help advance these projects and unblock them by improving how stakeholders use strategic communications early on in the process. So that was what led me back to marketing. And then ultimately what happened was very personal. It was that I wanted to have a family and start having children. And my career was one in which I had to be traveling overseas for extended periods of time. It wasn't family friendly. So I kind of had this midlife career crisis and was really loving the work I was doing on strategic communications. And that led me back to my marketing degree. And so my husband and I actually started a marketing agency when I got married. And that was what kind of kicked off the second half of my professional career, which was really focused on marketing.
Getting the message out there is one thing.
Absolutely.
Would you mind sharing a little bit more in terms of the marketing agency then that you launched and how that came about? You mentioned as well that kind of the shift in your career, but I'd love to understand a little as well in terms of when you launched that agency. Was there a particular type of segment within marketing that you focused on, or something that you got early traction on, or what were the learnings around there?
Yeah, gosh, it's funny. We started that company. I have not having any idea what we were getting into. I think it was my husband who was my co-founder, and both of us just thought that this felt like a good adventure at the time. And I think we were thinking pretty small. We were thinking that we would help local companies. We're based in the mid-Atlantic region of the US. And what happened was that's how it started. What happened actually that really changed everything was we became one of the earliest partners of HubSpot back when the inbound marketing movement was just getting off the ground. And that really changed the whole trajectory of the business and really of our careers, because we started working with companies all over the country in all different sectors. And as part of that, and that's really what led me to this creator and push that I've had in my career, because as the founder and the CEO of the company, for the first time ever, I was also the chief salesperson, the architect of the brand. It was up to me to raise the visibility of the company. And one of the pathways I saw to do that was through building a personal brand and being really active on LinkedIn. So, what started as really a differentiator of working with HubSpot ultimately was also the thing that led us to sell the company in 2017, because being a HubSpot partner agency and and advocating and working with companies on inbound marketing in the early days was a real differentiator, but it became kind of de rigueur. It was what everybody was doing. It was more commoditized. We didn't want to be in a very commoditized business. And so at that point, I was kind of ready for the next adventure and really excited about going into B2B tech, which is why we sold the company. Yeah, we started the business in 2006, which sounds
Wow,
like
right.
years
So,
ago.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and we sold it in 2017. So it was a great ride, and it was a great time to be in that space and to also just like learn from HubSpot because I think their growth story on its own was really interesting. And one of the greatest things about being an early partner is they really invited us into the inner sanctum, and
Yeah.
we would go there and spend a lot of time with their leadership team. I got to know Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Shah and some of the other early leaders in HubSpot. And I feel like I learned a lot from them. And to this day, I follow a lot of them and I'm still learning.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a fascinating company as well. How they're kind of constantly evolving, aren't they? Yeah. No, that's really interesting what you mentioned as well around the founder in terms of like having you being the face of the brand, the face of the agency. And I know that that's something that's become quite, what would I say, quite well known now about people that are founding companies. Like now it's, you can build a product, get a prototype relatively easy with AI and so on. The challenge at the moment is the distribution. And you see that how people are leaning more into kind of like being the founder-led growth and growing based on that. You were already doing this probably more than 15 years ago. So I'd love to hear a little bit more in terms of how you think that's evolved from when you initially were doing it for your agency, how you think that space has evolved now, and what do you see like kind of the challenges are now versus when you initially got started?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because when I started, it was partly just out of necessity because I had to fill the pipeline for my company and we didn't have a budget for paid ads. So that was the easiest way for me to inexpensively spread the word about who we were. That coupled with like we were drinking our own champagne and we had a content marketing strategy and it was working. Back then, I would say, first of all, it was mostly men who were very active. I mean, all of the earliest LinkedIn quote unquote influencers, like I think the original person that most people point to is like Justin Welsh really got this started. And that back then was when people referred to the style of writing on LinkedIn as broetry because it was a lot of men posting in a very particular way.
Yeah.
I remember thinking kind of the broetry thing was silly and I never loved the format of it, but I remember thinking I cannot possibly sit here and let all the guys be the only ones to benefit from this. And so I just challenged myself. I was like, I'm going to post every single day for a year to LinkedIn and just see what happens. And that's what I did. And it was hard at times because I didn't really know what to say sometimes. And it's like exercise. It's a muscle you build. Through that experience of posting for a year, number one, I saw my follower count grow considerably. Number two, I learned a lot about like what works on LinkedIn, what patterns and rhythms and practices I needed to build for myself to be able to maintain consistency, because it is a habit, again, like going to the gym where, different people need to approach that in different ways. So that was kind of my early experience. And then over the years, it's been interesting because I've gone to different companies. Like I started it when I was a founder, so I had complete free reign to post whatever I wanted about whatever I wanted to talk about because I only answered to me. And then over the years, I sold my company. I started working for other people and I had to like relearn what to post because all of a sudden I wasn't only answering to me. It is my personal brand and my profile and I own it. But at the same time, especially when you're in marketing, the way you show up in the world, you have an obligation to do it in a way that serves the brand you represent. And that's a big debate I think people have about creators and personal branding. This is just the way I look at it. It's different if you're, I don't know, an engineer or you're in accounting. Your job isn't about promoting the brand. But when you take our job, especially as head of marketing, where you're explicitly coming on to grow the brand, to grow the company, the way that you present yourself online has to be aligned with that, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. What would you say from your own experience then, from running your own company then to being a part of another company? Like even from a tactical base, then what would you think would be the biggest challenges from before that you could, you post whatever you want and obviously what you're interested in and so on. But for you, what did you find was the biggest challenge? Not necessarily posting on LinkedIn, but just going from running your own company then to being part of another company and kind of reporting to people and having kind of, I guess every company has targets and so on, whether you're a part of one or whether you're running one. But just in terms of the change and the transition for yourself, what do you find is the biggest challenge?
Yeah, it might not be what people think. I think a lot of people immediately assume that if you were to make that switch, the challenge is like, oh, don't share your controversial opinions. And that was never really the issue for me, because I've always approached my online presence, and I try to approach my life this way too. So like, hopefully what you see online is what you get in person. I've always approached it as I'm going to try to be positive. I'm like not out there to tear anybody else down, to criticize someone else. Like I've always thought, who am I to judge? The only thing I will judge is my own self. And I don't really get political in my presence. And so that wasn't the challenge. It was more around educating the companies that I work with and aligning with them at the CEO level, at the employee level, and at the board level about why I approach social media the way I do. And what I mean by that is I've worked for lots of different companies and led lots of different teams backed by lots of different investors. And over the course of the last almost 10 years since I sold my company, I've had a variety of different experiences. And some examples are, I have worked for CEOs who have like looked at what I'm posting and read into it and thought like every post must be about them. That became a problem. And the truth is it's not. Like, I'm posting observations about the world, about marketing writ large, about the things I'm seeing online. But I've worked for certain CEOs, not recently, I'll just say this, who like were a little paranoid about it. I've led teams of people who reported to me who worried that I would use conversations with them as starting points or thought starters for posts, which I've never divulged confidential information about anyone. I've never referred to specific conversations, but I think there's almost this anticipatory fear of like, oh, you're very active on social, ever going to talk about me? And in my case, the answer is no, I am never going to talk about you. I've had bosses I haven't liked working for. I've had direct reports who haven't been great. Never have I, even in a veiled way, tried to shade or subtweet them. And I never would. I just think that's unhealthy. I think it's bad from a career standpoint, but people worry about that. And then I've also had investors and boards who have questioned well, you have this big online presence. Why aren't you constantly promoting the company? And so there's this education that's needed and an alignment from the get-go that, look, this is my personal brand. This is mine. And I believe it can be used for the good of the company. But the only reason I have not the only, one of the big reasons I have a big personal brand or bigger and growing is that I don't choose to only talk about the companies I work for. It's not promotional. It is truly about what I'm learning as I'm learning it. And I've always said it's about let's lift each other up together. I'm not the smartest marketer in the room at all, but I figure that if there's a question I have and I'm learning something about it, there must be at least 10 other people out there that have the same question. And maybe there's 100 that already know the answer and think they're smarter, and that's fine. There's a lot of people that I'm going to learn from on social media too, but I think we all have something to teach other people. And as long as you're transparent about what you're learning, what you're thinking, what you know, what you don't know, then I think that's really healthy. And I think we can all rise together with that approach. But it all starts with, in my experience, when you begin working with a company, setting the expectation of how you're going to use your social presence, what is inbounds, what is out of bounds, and what they should expect. And as long as you go in aligned, I think then you can have a really productive experience, within the context of the company you're working for. You're
a big part of Pavilion for the last number of years. How do you see, since say you sold the company back in 2017, B2B, I guess, especially in the B2B tech as well, probably at that time, it was kind of to some extent in its infancy in certain aspects, like communities like Pavilion, Exit 5, some of these, I guess they've only come up in the last maybe few years. Pavilion longer, I think, than Exit 5. But from your experience, how has it benefited you for both as an exiter of a company, but also as a marketeer, as a professional, those kind of companies? What do you find is most useful that you kind of draw on most from being part of those communities?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I am such a big believer in community. So I've spent years talking about it on LinkedIn while I worked at Pavilion. But I want to be very clear. I joined Pavilion 2 years before I was employed by Pavilion. And I did it because it was when I had sold my company. I was looking to build a new career in tech, and all of the smartest, most accomplished marketing leaders I knew were in what then was Revenue Collective, which was the predecessor name of Pavilion. And I was like, I have to be in that room. This is where the best conversations are happening, the smartest people are. And so at the time, there was no Pavilion presence in the area where I lived, but I joined anyway. And I learned so much. It was kind of unbelievable to me because I was in this private Slack community where these idols of mine in marketing were having casual conversations, being vulnerable, opening up, sharing, what they were learning, and you could see the back and forth. And it was like, you always say you want to be a fly on the wall. It was like being a fly on the wall and having access to the conversations that I never thought I would have access to. So it was amazing, and it really helped my career. It helped me find jobs. It helped me succeed in jobs. It taught me things that I didn't even know I should be learning. That was the other cool thing. Like when you're a fly on the wall, you're like, oh, I didn't even know that was a conversation that happens. I wouldn't have even known to ask that question. And that's like the real value I got from Pavilion was like knowing what I didn't know. Because that's the scariest thing when you're in a leadership role. It's like this imposter syndrome and like, I don't even know what I don't know. Because I feel like if I know that I should be asking a question, I'm the kind of person who's going to like chase down the answer. I'm going to figure it out. But it's the questions I don't even know I should be asking that terrify me the most. So anyway, that's what drew me to it. And that's part of why I joined the company, because I saw how transformative it was for my career and my life. And I was like, I want to be a part of this. I really believe in it. And so I was very, very fortunate to get to spend 3 years as a part of that team, building something that I think is really, really special. And to this day, I'm just honored to be a part of. So I'm still a Pavilion member, even though I'm no longer there. I'm still a huge fan, a believer. And I really believe that now more than ever, community is so crucial for a few reasons. Number one, things are changing so quickly. I mean, they always change fast, but with AI, the pace is insane. And there is no way that any one person can keep up with that by like reading, studying, listening to podcasts. Like you just can't keep up with all of it. And so you have to form like a hive mind. And that's what I really think the value of community is like, think of it as in Pavilion, there's 10,000 members. I am part of a team of 10,000 people who are all working together to stay on top of how quickly this is changing and all helping each other and reinforcing what we're learning. That's like incredibly powerful. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is that because of what's happened in search and with buyer behavior and with AI, all of a sudden community is where a vast majority of buying decisions begin, especially in B2B. So I saw it firsthand every day in Pavilion Slack community, which I'm still a part of and I'm still seeing, where people would go in and say, okay, I'm looking for an AEO platform. This is the hot new thing right now, right? GEO, AEO, however you want to refer to it. But like answer engine optimization. And people will go into a place like Pavilion and say like, who are you using? What are the best providers? Or they'll say, I'm thinking of using this one. Who has experience with it? And so that whole purchase process is really starting through peer-led recommendation and advice. And it's because that's the thing that we trust the most. And community has unlocked this ability to tap into it, again, because we have this hive mind quickly and easily. And so I think it's invaluable for all of us in terms of developing our own careers and skills, but it's also invaluable for us as the leaders of brands to have a presence in those communities, to do it in a way that's helpful and organic if we want to be a part of that consideration set when people buy.
Yeah. It's definitely true. I think that about, if you get a referral or from somebody, you're much more likely to take that than just, if you go and see a review on Google or something like that, I think that's why communities like Exit 5, Pavilion, you can see as well that the people, I guess, that contribute more, probably if they're going to refer you a certain product or a service, that it has substance and weight if they've used it and so on. I can see the value of a community being so strong. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about creator-led marketing in terms of, I know where you are now at Sequel. Maybe first of all, you could share a little bit about Sequel in the space that you're in, and just for the audience that are unfamiliar with the company.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a pattern. I described how I joined Pavilion because I essentially was a customer and I really experienced it and believed in it. And the same thing happened with SQL. So when I was leading marketing at Pavilion, we were a customer for 2 years of SQL, which is at its heart a webinar platform, but the webinar space is very crowded. And so, the question is like, what makes SQL so special? Why was I so excited? The reason I'm so excited and why we chose it at Pavilion is SQL is the only webinar platform that actually lets you host your webinars on your website. So most webinars, people are going to Zoom or they're going to On24. SQL embeds in your domain. And it's not just about like having the webinar show up on the website. That's nice. It's a great experience for the visitor. But what's really special and exciting about it as a marketer is that because we truly embed on the website, we actually have access to all of the data for any individual website visitor who engages with a webinar. So as soon as they engage with a webinar, we can see everything they did on the website before they engaged, everything they're doing during, and everything after. So all of a sudden it unlocks the possibility for webinars to become a truly seamless part of the customer journey, to become sources of intent data, to use them to enrich and progressively profile website visitors. So like one of the things we can do is if you answer a poll question in a webinar on SQL, the brand running the webinar can add your answer to a contact property in their CRM. So if you don't want to ask that question in a form, or if you're trying to qualify a lead, you can do it in a way that feels so much more natural. So that to me is exciting. And what that really means in terms of the future is, we're, again, back to AI. We're in this world where I think people are seeing increasingly fewer reasons to go to websites because these answer engines are giving them the information they need. And companies still need to have websites, right? Because that's where they put all the data and the content that trains the answer engine. But like, if nobody comes to your site, what a shame. You've invested in all of this content. It's the one place on the internet where you can completely control the narrative. You can guide people to engage with your brand. So what is exciting to me is that if you are hosting your webinars on your website, you're giving people a real reason to come to the site, as opposed to sending them to Zoom or as opposed to sending them to some third-party webinar platform. And once you have them on your site, then you can begin a journey that otherwise may never have started if they were just getting their answers in an AI engine. And so to me, looking ahead to the future, a year, 3 years, 5 years, maybe it's not happening quite to that extent now, but I really do think pretty soon we're all going to have AI agents that buy for us. So how do we get humans to come to our sites? How do we build that relationship? How do we establish and anchor our brand in their psyche? And the webinar holds this potential to really unlock that for a lot of companies. It's something we're all already doing. It's just that we're sending all of this valuable traffic to third-party websites and not our own. So that's what I get excited about, and that's why I came here.
Yeah, it's an interesting one as well, because I think from what you see of COVID, like everyone was doing webinars, but when they're done right, they can be so much more impactful than when they're just done for the sake of doing a webinar. In your perspective, who or what companies, even like tactics or anything that you see that companies that do webinars successfully as a part of their acquisition or a part of their nurturing stage, what do you think they're doing right versus other companies that just do a webinar because they're kind of copying and they're doing a webinar for the sake of it? Obviously what SQL do, that makes total sense. Capturing the data on your website, you own it. You're not then relying on another platform. But anything else in terms of actually keeping engagement or getting people to sign up, or anything that you see the companies do it effectively and that they actually can do that consistently with running webinars?
Yeah, I think I agree. There's a lot of bad webinars, let's be honest. And I think, and it was funny because a lot of people came out of COVID with this feeling of like, I don't want to ever sit on another Zoom call. And so that's actually part of what got me excited about coming here is this possibility of like rebranding webinars and giving
Yeah.
them a better name. And it's true, like there are some companies for whom this is one of the most effective channels. And the difference is the way they think about it. I think the ones that are not seeing success, and also, by the way, webinars can be very bandwidth intensive. So if they're not successful for you, shame on you for putting all that time into them. So the ones that don't do it well are thinking about webinars as a point in time, as truly just an event. And they're, working really hard to get all these people to come to it. And they're putting all this effort into the content itself and, managing the event as it is running. And then they kind of like let it, pop the balloon afterwards and not a lot happens. I think if you're going to run a virtual event, it needs to be a part of a much broader campaign. And we actually have a series at Sequel called our Masterclass, where we go behind the scenes with brands that are seeing success with their webinars and we break down exactly what they're doing to find success. And so I can give you a few examples. Like we have an awesome masterclass with the team from Copy.ai where they break down their whole process following the webinar of like how they take the webinar content and they spin it into all these different marketing assets, and it lives on the website, it's sent out to customers, it's syndicated on social media. They're repurposing and they're doing it so quickly in a way that's so contextually appropriate that they're able to dramatically increase the impact that their content is having. That's one example. We have another masterclass coming up on the 18th of December with Clay and Rev partners. And the team at Clay uses our platform and they are the absolute masters of like integrating workflows, right? Like that's what their platform is about. And I'm so excited to hear their whole story because essentially what these two companies have done is figured out kind of what I described, which is how to take the data from a webinar on not just who registered and who attended, but how they engaged with the content, what responses they provided to polls, what else they did on the site while they were watching the webinar, and enrich that, segment it a number of different ways, and then build campaigns off of it to truly build a full funnel strategy. And so, I think those are great examples of like how the best marketers are thinking about it. And I think it speaks to like, if we zoom out, a much bigger problem in the marketing industry, which I've been guilty of at many points in my career, just to be very clear. And that is that I think a lot of marketers, it's the old 80-20. We put 80% of our effort into creating the content, in this case, creating the webinar, and only 20% into the promotion and distribution. Really done well, it should be the opposite. It should be like 20% should go into creating the webinar and 80% should be everything that surrounds it and how we then like capitalize on that to drive momentum.
Yeah. How do you think when you talk about that distribution piece, creator-led content, you've been a creator for a long time before it was even a big thing, like when you mentioned about with the agency in the early days. How do you see it now from your perspective of B2B creators? In your opinion, do you see this as being a really effective go-to-market in the more longer term? Or is it something that it'll remain to be seen because of platforms going more pay to play and that's kind of detrimental to reach and stuff like that? Or what's your opinion about that, about B2B creators at the moment?
I think I am a huge believer in it, and there will be platform changes, but the creator itself shouldn't necessarily be so platform dependent. And what I mean by that is, I'll use myself as an example. Like right now, my following is on LinkedIn, right? It absolutely is. And so you could argue that it's platform dependent, but the truth is, I think once you build a following, if the algorithm changes, if you've done it right, you can largely take your following with you. And that also plays out when you see people move companies. I mean, I worked at Pavilion and people followed me when I was at Pavilion, but now they follow me when I'm at Sequel. I think when you boil it all down, it comes down to trust, and you have to earn it. And so this is why I think a lot of people struggle with building their personal brands and followings and struggle with this idea of creator, because it isn't a quick fix. There isn't an easy button. It is a process that unfolds over time of you adding value for people, helping them, educating them, inspiring them. And if people see value in what you're doing, they will stick with you, regardless of where you go. And so that's kind of how I've approached it. and what I think works. And I've seen it play out and work very well. When I was at Pavilion, the vast majority of our pipeline either influenced by or came from LinkedIn organic. And it was, partially because of Sam Jacobs, to his credit, was a CEO who, even before I got to the company, had seen the value in investing in a personal brand on LinkedIn. And he built his own and was very consistent about it. I was building mine. We had members who would post. So that worked really well. And at SQL, it's something that we're looking at as well. I believe in it. And I think that any company that isn't encouraging its own team to be active online and isn't supporting their team in every way they possibly can to build their own presence is really missing a huge opportunity.
In your opinion, what do you think the future holds for B2B? Clay aside for a moment, do you see any other trends that you see being like kind of a big thing in the next, say, 6 to 24 months?
One is just consolidation. When I was looking at where to go next after Pavilion, I was very intentional about this because the biggest fear I have is this consolidation play, meaning there are a lot of foundational model companies out there, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, and they are evolving so quickly. There are tons of little AI companies that are platform solutions. And what's scary, or I'm afraid for them, is that one of these foundational model companies could just add what they do as a feature, and all of a sudden that company is, no longer has value. And so I looked really closely at that when I chose where to go next. And it was, again, one of the reasons I was excited about SQL is this is not something that can be disrupted that easily. So I'm watching that really closely. And I think that relates to this broader trend of I believe there is a bit of a bubble right now. I don't know if it's as dramatic as people are making out, but there's a lot of talk in the B2B world about this concept of experimental recurring revenue or experimental run rate, meaning that companies have these innovation budgets or these experiment budgets where they're able to go out and buy all these different AI tools to test them. But just because they've bought them, it doesn't mean they're going to stick with them or renew. And so I think that there's like a retention crisis looming in B2B. That is one thing that I'm watching more broadly. And then the other thing is what I talked about earlier, which is this like rise of agents as taking over parts of the purchase process and what that means for how we go to market. And again, that's why SQL's CEO, Juana Manalach, has this incredible vision of the future where websites will be more intelligent and they'll be, today websites have two purposes: educate and engage, right? And educate is all the content and all the SEO. That's going to draw fewer people in the future. And so we have to like really lean in on how are we going to build our websites as engagement mechanisms in order to still be able to drive awareness and drive momentum in our pipelines. And so that's the other thing that I'm very focused on. And then I guess third would be like just this whole topic of emotional connection with our audiences. And I would lump creator in there in terms of like being an emotional way to build a relationship with your audience, along with events and other forms of content just like this, like podcasts and video interviews. I think all of these different mechanisms that are about personal relationships are the things that are going to really have a renaissance in the next year, because we're living at a time when AI makes everything feel fake and contrived. And every one of us, just like after COVID, we craved in-person connection.
Yeah.
AI is going to do the same thing. We're all going to be craving what we know and can verify is real. And like getting in a room with other people, that's real. Having a relationship, even if it's virtual, with a creator or with content, that's real. So those are the things that I'm watching.
Yeah. Are you seeing with events that you mentioned there as well? What are you seeing in terms of B2B at the moment with events are you seeing that as well, of like kind of the reemergence of events, but very targeted?
Yes and no. I love all the targeted events, and we're going to do a number of them next year ourselves. But I think it's less maybe about that than it is about the theme word I would throw out there is experience. I think your event can be huge. It can be tiny. The size and the audience is perhaps less important than the experience you deliver. And so if you're going to do a big event, you can't just check the box, I don't think, and do a typical convention. I think that format is really suffering and people are fatigued by it. I think There are some bigger events that are really working hard to deliver fantastic experiences and to make it more experiential. And that's exciting to me and something I'm interested in following and learning more about. And then there are smaller events. There are some that are great at delivering amazing experiences. This is one thing I think we did really well at Pavilion. We do these salon dinners where we have a very prescribed format, or had, I'm no longer there, but and that format really works. And that was about the experience. But there are also small events that are terrible. I've been to
Yeah.
smaller dinners that have great audiences, but you get in the room and there's no format and you're all just milling about and you don't know who to talk to. It's
Yeah.
unstructured. And you leave and you feel like you've only met one or two people. And if you're an introvert like me, the whole night was painful because you had to kind of like start conversations. And so it all comes back to we will be craving experiences, which is the same thing I said about websites. Like, how do we deliver outstanding experiences for people and make that memorable in their minds?
Yeah. Caitlin, it was great talking with you. I learned a ton. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Before we go, where can people see your content? I guess on LinkedIn, you're most active, no?
Yes, definitely LinkedIn. If you send me a connection request, make sure to mention that you heard this conversation and I'll definitely accept your request.
Great, thanks. And we'll also leave the details of SQL, the episodes you mentioned around behind the scenes. I think the audience would be really interested to see that as well. Thanks again for joining us today. It was great speaking with you, Caitlin.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot.